but to do that, he used harmonies.
And that's not presented in modern scientific education, the fact to use harmonies. That's pretty interesting.
No, because usually it's like Descartes, Kepler, Bach. They were all what we say mystics. But the system just sees they were great mathematicians and scientists. They don't want to go to the fact that, for example, Descartes said his ideas came from an angel, or he also got many things from dreams. He was in parallel worlds, and Bach.
They don't mention that.
No, they just say, oh, Bach is a great mathematician. But why was he into science? Because he wanted to understand the power of God, how this power works.
Because he was a musician, and he was responsible for the music. Was created. They wanted to understand the power we put outside, the frequencies. Right, outside of ourselves. But Bach, as a musician, knew...
He's fascinated by this.
Let me just say this. Let me just say, hey, Roxy, let me say this. So you're saying Bach, as a musician, knew that there were physical laws in music, and they reflected the laws of the Creator. So he had to know what the latest knowledge was on that understanding to make his music. That's what you're saying, right?
Yes, and actually there was also a person doing the first experiments on electricity, and that person was also Bach friends. And I was very surprised. That was before Franklin. Actually, Franklin got his electricity set from that person. I never remember name.
Was his name Leyden, L-E-Y-D-E-N, the Leyden jar? The name Leyden, L-E-Y-D-E-N, comes to me. Is that who it was? Can't remember. Okay, don't worry about it. So what were you going to say about LaRouche? So what LaRouche...
Right. Or something like that, Professor. And there was another Winkler that wrote in 1744, Gedanken vor der Eigenschaften, Wirkungen und Ursachen der Elektrizität. So thoughts about the effects and the causes of electricity. That was written in 1744. And Bach knew these people that were working on electricity. And that's the time where he starts to make these musical offers for the king and develop his art of the fugue and the well-tempered clavier. So it's already we see that this new environment was starting there and was already having effects. And
on art.
Yes. There was a diplomat that was at the court, and he got many of Bach's manuscripts and works. He took them to Vienna, and there he invited to his salon the young Mozart and the young Beethoven. Beethoven was 12 or 11, and they will analyze and learn music from Bach. And they expanded on these ideas of developing the motivic, the theme,
motive.
How you can play with this idea, with a musical idea, and expand on that. And that's the thing that LaRouche finds so interesting, that he says music is an amazing tool to develop your brain and to learn how to expand on patterns, how to play with patterns and go beyond. And that's the same thing Zappa is doing. He's actually making the music because LaRouche thinks, okay, everything is sick, the system is sick, and we have to fight this shift, connecting to the tradition and studying these great ideas from the past. Yeah. And Zappa has also this idea of the conceptual continuity, but he has a less serious approach. instead of criticizing things like LaRouche in their videos, they say your culture is not yours, you're manipulated, you're alienated, and this and that. Zappa says, I love monsters. They're so funny. And he's making you laugh, but at the same time he's making you see how absurd and how low and how wherever all these things are. And then he goes to make the great music. And he's doing the same things that Bach will do. Like Bach said, every instrument has the same importance, because in music sometimes there is like the solo and the harmonies and the bass and the rest is just accompaniment for the main voice. But for Bach, all voices have the same importance. He said all voices are learned on the topic and have the same importance in the conversation. And Zappa does that. For example, he takes a melodic motif and he has all these signs. If you see the Roxy, the movie, the new one that was released,
the new one,
you see how he's conducting and the patterns jump from one instrument to the other. Sometimes it's the melody, sometimes it's the rhythm. He has signs so that everybody plays the same music, or just two instruments play the same. Like there is a place where the keyboard and the percussionists are playing the same very fast, amazing. And then he will make a sign to make some gestures or breaks, or another person do the solos. And this is the type of conversation that we should be able to engage. That's why he criticizes the popular music. And he sees what LaRouche is seeing, that how the cheapness, the popular culture can be a disservice. And he is trying to give you the equivalent of the music the king will have. Everybody should have the same type of music. Intelligent musical ideas, not only little songs with 3 chords and silly text. He wants people to... His music was not played on the radio, but he wanted people, everybody, just to have the opportunity to listen to more abstract, more complex musical ideas that develop, not only repeat and repeat, but conversations that go with here's an idea, and here's another idea, and here's another idea, here's another idea. That's why people may find it hard or boring or whatever, because he has so many ideas. He's presenting so much. There is another part in the movie where he asks the percussionists and the drummers to play alone, because what they're doing is so complex, and when they finish, he says, you have been fooled. Now we're going to play the whole. But he's just showing you,
what were we
this
fooled
is just
by?
one part.
What were we fooled by?
By the musicians, because you think that's the piece. No, that was just the percussion of the whole.
Okay.
And,
interesting. Carry on. So, what's your next point?
Yes, that the thing is, what I see, for example, with you with your quadrants, that you present all ideas. Like you present LaRouche and some things that may actually be opposite or against in contradiction. But you take from everybody, and you are not like a fanatical follower of this system or that person or this idea. You present everything, you explore everything. And that's the thing we should learn from you. Like when you're doing your DJ, at the beginning, you play all types of things. You present all types of patterns, of ideas.
Yes.
Because we should expand. Exploring the whole environment is like we're in this big piano We have all these sound landscapes, and we are, that's the thing LaRouche doesn't see. We cannot turn off this environment. It's like that. We're in this environment. So healing is not just to go back and study music until Brahms. Like he said, after Brahms, everything is sick and paranoid and schizophrenic.
He said,
I disagree with the Zappa is really presenting a type of healing too. And he saw his music as therapy. The cheapness. And both had this tool. It's a very important tool of his political agenda. Music is a very important tool to educate the people, and it's also very ionic. Ion is talking all the time about frequencies because it goes beyond music. It goes beyond. Yeah. It goes to.
I'm going to play a quote here. I'm going to play a quote from LaRouche, and he's talking about music is not involved with the senses. It involves the mind. Now, he romanticizes the mind. We may not agree with that term, but what he means by mind is what Zappa was doing in his time. He was presenting the mind's view of sound. He wasn't embedded in sensation. You see what I'm saying? This is the parallel between LaRouche. Zappa carries on the same, strategy of LaRouche, but has different tactics. He puts on the poison, the 20th century garbage, and turns it into gold. LaRouche wouldn't do that. But LaRouche does define the mind and its relation to the sensory experience of music correctly, and Frank continues that. And then Ion goes in and follows on that too. Is there one more thing you want to say? Because I'll play LaRouche talking what you're saying. This opening of this.
No, you can play it, and then we can talk.
Great. Let me just see. Is that? Thought I saw an anonymous person come in. I was wondering if it was Bert. No, that they're gone now. Okay, so I'll play this. Get the volume up. Make sure everything's on. We put this through the Soundflower. That's off. So this is a broadcast from way back in 2012 where LaRouche and his younger colleagues are going to present some basic instruction in the Platonic tradition, the Leibnizian tradition in music, and they give examples, little sound samples. But we won't go through all that. Just want you to hear LaRouche's open beginning ideological statement. So, okay, we got that on. I hope this is it. Put this back to 0.
Hello. Okay. Welcome to the LaRouche PAC Weekly Report for December the 5th, 2012. I'm John Hoeffel, and joining me in the studio today are Matthew Ogden of LPAC TV, Megan Beats of The Basement, and Lyndon LaRouche.
Yes.
So, Lynn.
Well, this is a little note of explanation should be added in prefacing what we're about to do. That the objective here is not simply trying to screen music or trying to use a screen to explain music, but rather it's trying to show something else, that there is a principle involved with Bach's perfection of the idea of tuning, which actually, when you compare it with other things besides contrary to Bach's, you find a mess on your hands. And what this reveals to us is the fact that there is a reason behind Bach's composition and his principles of composition, which are displayed in this particular example, which actually governs the way people should think about themselves, about life and things in general. Because music is not simply entertainment. Classical music in particular is a composition which enables us to enrich the capabilities of the human mind. And that the mastery of this is therefore relevant to all human beings, potentially at least. That learning how to use your mind properly, the way it was intended to be used, is the purpose here. And with that in mind, this is not just music. It's more than just music. It's the principle of the human mind. And we hope that you will take away from this experience some inkling of that and also be devoted to pursuing this matter further.
Let me just add to what you said. We're going to be looking at Bach, but Bach also doesn't come out of nowhere. Bach comes out of a direct continuity, a direct line that stems from the Renaissance with Nicholas of Cusa, through Kepler, up to Bach, and then beyond. And we're going to start to touch a little bit on the beyond just today. What Cusa did is establish, as you're saying, that the location and the presence of the human mind in human mental experience, which is of the category of discovery and access to principle, he locates this outside of the senses and makes a truthful declaration of this as the basis of human society and human existence, as opposed to every other species on the planet. Kepler applies what Cusa discovered and declared, applies it and validates it as the method for making discoveries of physical principles in science. Now, in the context and in the process of doing that, Kepler also opens the door for what we see in Bach, which is a complete revolution in the musical language. And the place he does that is in his discovery of universal gravitation, by using the language of polyphonic harmonics to be able to locate the motions of the multitude of planets of the solar system as a single unified system, and answer the question why do we have this particular set of motions of the different planets moved by the sun and not some other set. Now, what comes out of this is that Kepler actually changes the meaning of harmonics. And he takes the harmonic intervals, which exist in music and had been studied from the time of the Greeks, if not before, as mathematical values, as direct mathematical, arithmetical proportions. And Kepler establishes a new set of harmonics which are not fixed mathematical proportions. And if people look back at his work, what he finds in the harmonic ratios of the motions of the planets are not these arithmetical harmonies. They're slightly larger, they're slightly smaller, and they're changing. They're constantly adjusting and changing. So this means, number one, sound is not something which, and harmonic sound in particular, that language is not something which stems from arithmetic and mathematical values from the bottom up. It stems from the mind down, because the place that these planetary harmonics originates from is the singleness of action and idea of the mover, of the sun. And every motion taking place in the solar system is not some point-to-point interaction. It's an expression of the unity of effect of the action of the sun. Now, this opens the door, as I said, for Bach, who opens a complete revolution in music and the musical language and takes what had been declared by Cusa, experienced and applied by Kepler and validated. What Bach begins to do by making this the basis of the musical language is he begins to generalize this principle as he begins to make this a general method of human communication and human experience through music. Now, this was actually expressed very beautifully by the first biographer of Bach, Nicholas Forkel, who was working very closely with the Bach family. And his description of the way that Bach invented his harmonic intervals, or he describes it as Bach's harmonies, are that Bach never started from sound. And the typical method beforehand was to have either a melody or maybe a bass line, a melody in the bass voice, and then to harmonize point to point sounds over that, which would either sound good, or maybe you have a pass to a dissonance and then you resolve to something which sounds harmonic again. The way Forkel describes it is that that's not the way Bach composed. The way Bach composed is by the creation of 3, 4, 5, and sometimes more independent voices, which were making, and he describes it with this beautiful image of independent personalities, which were equally well informed on the topic of discussion and which interact and discuss with each other. And what's formed in between them, in the counterpoint of these different statements of an idea, is a unity. And that Bach's harmonies and method of composition comes out of this. Now, this was studied intensely by the people coming out of the culture of Bach. And what we're going to start with is Mozart. Mozart, in 1782, I think it is, arrives in Vienna as a young man, 25, 26 years old. Now, Mozart's coming from a very musical family. He's already an established composer. He had been a child prodigy, very well known. Mozart, when he arrives at Vienna, is brought into the salon of Baron von Swieten, who had been the ambassador at Potsdam and Berlin, had talked and known the king there, had known C.P.E. Bach, and had been collecting these manuscripts of Bach's works, particularly Bach's fugues, and then at this point bringing them back to Vienna, which was the center of musical culture in Europe at the time. And Mozart's invited into these Sunday salons once a week, where he had an intensive study of young musicians around Baron von Swieten, including Mozart and Haydn, who's a little older, of the fugues of Bach. And this revolutionizes Mozart's compositions. It puts him through a certain revolutionary experience of the mind, out of which you have a complete transformation in his own already beautiful compositions. So what he does, one thing they do during these salons is they take the fugues from the Well-Tempered Clavier, which we began to study last week. Mozart takes the principle which is implicit in Bach, commented on by Forkel, of the independence of the voices and counterpoint with one another. And he makes that explicit by setting the fugue, which had been written for keyboard, as a piece for a string quartet. And they use this in the salon as an object of experimentation and study to pull this apart and find out what is this principle in here. So what I'd like to do is begin by what I'd like to do as the example to explore today is I want to use the same fugue that we used last week, which is the fugue in C minor from the second book of the Well-Tempered Clavier. So what I'll do now is just start by playing the very opening of the keyboard version of that so we can have it in our heads. Now what I'll play is I'll play the theme that we just heard as it's sung by the violin, the voice of the violin. So that I'll play the violin, and then after that I'll play the cello. So we can now hear the transformation that happens by adding the dimensionalities of the string medium.
Okay, that's Megan Beats, M-E-G-A-N, I think. M-E-G-H-A-N, maybe, Beats, B-E-E-T-S, a follower, disciple, colleague of LaRouche, incredibly articulately explaining the thing that Roxy was telling us about. And I want to thank Roxy for finding this video. She went into the LaRouche Quadrant and found some neat stuff and found this very good introduction and expansion and detail of what Roxy was summarizing. If you're interested, maybe we'll post this on Facebook. Well, maybe you already did. Yeah, Roxy, you already pasted this on my Facebook page, so people can go and hear the whole 58 minutes, an hour-long broadcast. But that is incredible what she said, eh? Isn't it, Roxy?
Right. Because you see how they developed a motive, how there is a progression, an understanding, and the different twists and turns, rotations, inversions of how music, the thematic, is developed, and how one idea jumps from one voice to other voice and creates this conversation.
Right. Now, the point we're making, though, this is the Zappa hour. Let me say this, Roxy. The point we're making is that this tradition, this comprehensive use of the trivium and the quadrivium, all the sciences and arts in making new creations, that the artist is not running from science, science is not running from art. They both go together, and if you read LaRouche's stuff, he spells this out and retrieves it. People don't know that this big split between art and science comes in with writers like C.P. Lewis and C.P. Snow, I think it is, whoever did the Two Cultures in the late 50s, and they have this big argument. But originally, the creativity came from anybody in that salon, intellectual, poet, scientist, artist, and musician. So this is not, I don't think, you've had musical training. Your teachers did not tell you this when you were a kid, did they? They didn't tell you that Mozart and Bach were hanging out with the local scientists, right?
Well, everybody knows he was into mathematics, and he was a big mystic, but I didn't know that the system of the Well-Tempered Clavier came from Kepler ideas of the cosmos.
Kepler, Right.
that he was praising God by using this system. You are already like sort of engaging God, because that's like the intelligence that is there. I was even crying when I was discovering that, like,
brought you to tears of the beauty of it.
Yes.
Right. Now, what you're doing really uniquely, and it's never been done in the Zappa world, you're going to show how Zappa is continuing the tradition of looking for the big note, the universal principles, the hidden ground of music and the frequencies and all that he talks about in different interviews here and there that nobody picks up on. I remember the Evergreens told me that Zappa had a deep philosophy underneath all that he was creating through apparent sound. He had a deep philosophy.
Yes, and also the idea of the conceptual continuity, that he goes to tradition. He knew the classics. He knew the most contemporary. Yes. And he builds on that, infiltrating the cheapness of the popular culture. He says he's a rock artist, but he's really an expanded contemporary composer. And his band is like an orchestra, an electronic orchestra. But he had to engage the electric environment, and he had to engage these other forums, because he wanted to present what the mind is capable of, what the human can do to everybody, like feet. Right. He was very aware of the substances. He was always criticizing, for example, this type of lounge music, the piano music for the bars. He would make a lot of quotes.
He was criticizing the food.
Yeah, the substances that are, the substances, they're ideas that are feeding the people. He will say the beer drinking folks. He said, you can go drink beer, go to the disco, listen to the three chords music, or you can listen to me. It's like, you can be a little man, or you can start your ascension. And he was aware of the
Now, Roxy, in his interviews, he said he never liked, listen to this, he never liked Beethoven, Bach, he hated all that stuff, it didn't interest him. Well, that's because it was not relevant to his time, to our time. That music's great, but it's the tradition, the mind part, not the sensory manifestation of Bach's music at the time. You can like it or not like it. But LaRouche is asking you to understand the principles, the scientific principles, the laws of the universe that the music that these great composers tapped into, figured out, and then made their compositions based on that. But that's 200 years ago. Our ears have been changed over those 200 years. So here you have an ear conditioned by doo-wop and rhythm and blues and the pop culture America and movie and TV, and Zappa says that's the hamburger that the kids and people are eating. And it's inadequate. We need to bring in the non-sensory. We need to bring in the non-sensory environment, or bring in the non-sensory approach to the extended electrical, sensory, tactile world. And so he took the tradition and applied it to the present, which had different ears. See what I mean?
Yes, and different perception and different foods. And he was so aware of the food that he called his studio the kitchen. And in that, he's also very ionic. But the thing, when you don't have the non-physical and the ionic to complete, you end up in the conspiracy. Like LaRouche, he saw that there was a conspiracy that started with the Secret Council of 10 from Venice.
Yes. Yeah. In Venice.
And
yes.
The Newtonians and the Secret Council of 10 that came from the black nobility of Venice.
Yes.
And they were against the ideas of Leibniz and Bach, and like in a way they wanted to control what was given to the people to make them stupid in a way. Like they wouldn't let the people develop all their their mind, and he sees this conspiracy starting a long time ago. And Zappa will also talk about this type of things because they won't see that the solution will be not only developing your mind, but that was really the food, the new food that we had to get to reset.
Yes. So they were anticipating the RNA drops in the eye cell, which we created here in Indom, thanks to ION, and has great effects on people's health and energy and ability to experience anomalies and all kinds of stuff. So you see that LaRouche is defining the tradition for those guys back then, and women, if there were any, engaging in that scene, in the courts and around that elite group. And then you see Phineas Wake and James Joyce develops the themes, the tradition, but adapts it to the 20th century media environment. And then Frank Zappa comes along, and he lists James Joyce as an influence, and he develops the requirements, which are totally different from James Joyce's day in the 20s. It's a totally different world, as McLuhan explains. It's tactile, it's television, it's computers, it's satellites, and that's going to make a different ear. And so he has this parody in the theme of Uncle Meat, this ex-government scientist who's going to take this Mexican R&B group and have them hypnotize the population. And so it's not, Reuben the Jets are not a band that Uncle Meat creates to hypnotize people to reappreciate 50s music. No, it's not that. There's another agenda. And Frank is even saying that the Uncle Meat is the opposite of Frank. He is creating, dumbing down the population. It could be interpreted as Uncle Meat as evil, and dumbing down the population with Reuben the Jets. Whereas Frank is using that as a metaphor that he's doing the same thing, but the opposite, with the Mothers of Invention. He is bringing in new knowledge, new perceptions, and always said, we're the other people, found a way to get to you. And we explained, read interviews with Frank from right at the beginning in 66, 67. He's talking about being a human engineering lab, which he mentions on the liner notes on We're Only for the Money. And so he's parodying the tetrad management, the age of Kissinger and Brzezinski and these tetrad managers that are modulating populations, the whole global theater, as a musical phenomenon. String theory is late. String theory says, we must notice the musical basis of matter. Well, the oligarchy knew that. And LaRouche would call them the Aristotelian oligarchy, and the Platonic elite was a counter to the Aristotelian. So it's pretty amazing that where you live, Roxy, is where Frederick II and these people started something in Berlin?
Well, the community that came because the king allowed the Protestants that were persecuted in Prague and in France to come to Berlin.
Yes.
The Bohemians that came here to Rixdorf, they brought the ideas of Amos Comenius, and they had a big influence. And after that, the public schools were made, and many things. The Academy of Sciences and Amos Comenius
that comes out of Berlin.
Actually,
that comes out of Berlin.
The idea of a global system, a global, like the new world government, it's an idea that comes from Amos Comenius. He had already this.
And he lived before Leibniz, or at the same time as Leibniz, or after Leibniz? Isn't he before Leibniz?
Well, he lived during the religion wars. He was escaping all over the place.
Yeah, I have here 1592 to 1670. 1592 to 1670. The wars caused by the printing press. And then Leibniz.
But his ideas were really implanted here by Friedrich II. And that
Right.
had a big influence in other Protestant countries and how things then developed.
Right. So Leibniz is born in 1646, in the middle of Comenius' life. So he definitely could hear about Comenius by the time he's in his 20s to 30s, and influenced by that. But he's coming to the court, like you're saying. Frederick II brought Comenius to Berlin, or did someone else bring Comenius to Berlin?
No, he brought the Bohemians that had all these ideas. Even now, here in Rixdorf, there is like 2 statues of Comenius, and the garden is called Comenius.
Right.
And
so Comenius was part of the Bohemians.
yes, it was because they were Protestants. They had to go from Prague. It's the time of the religion wars.
Now, what's interesting about LaRouche is he says, if you go to the Dan Winter gang and the Alan Steinfeld gang, they will say there was this mystical, alchemical thing coming out of Prague around that time or just before. But LaRouche said that kind of addiction to symbolism and sacred geometry was not the Platonic mode. The Platonic mode did not depend on symbols. And you hear Megan Beats explaining that the mind is not looking for something that's continuous. It's knowing that the ratios and rhythms and intervals are changing all the time. And it's the mind that can respond to those changes in nature and other levels of experience and in human communication. That is the point. Not establishing a pattern. Okay, so the golden mean spirals this way, and all matter has this golden mean Fibonacci series, and that's what we worship, this incredible pattern. No, the pattern is more invisible than that, and it's always changing and has a tactile relationship. That's what Megan Beats beautifully, and rarely, I don't know many people could say what she said, spelled it out there of what mind means. Mind is not a rigid allegiance to dogma or even limited to visual imagery of the mind. The mind is comprehensive, tactile, and uses all the senses. And therefore, that's why musicians and sculptors could be part of the salon, because every sense was engaged in the act of communication and perceiving what the Creator had made. Let's see.
Yes, and
bringing... Go ahead.
The thing I see in, for example, Joyce McLuhan and you and Zappa, is that you motivate people to explore in all directions, explore all patterns, listen to everything. So this is the art of the fugue by Bob, the new art of the fugue.
Right, new song. So Frank, he learns from John Cage, he learns from Varese. The present-day composer refuses to die. That's like the conceptual continuity. The tradition must carry on. And it's Varese and Stravinsky, LaRouche says, aren't getting it. But LaRouche doesn't understand the McLuhan point, that the senses change and the technologies change the senses, so there's going to be a different kind of sounds. It's interesting, LaRouche, in a way, is stuck with his own sacred non-geometry. He's stuck with a certain kind of sound and cultural ambience. Whereas Frank knows that he's got to deal with the Varese, he's got to take on Stravinsky, Stockhausen, he's got to deal with the African-American music. He knows that they have developed a unique response to the electric environment, and he's got to deal with pop culture and Elvis and everything else that's happening around him that he grows up and he naturally likes. But he's not going to stay stuck in what he likes. He's not going to be an advocate of doo-wop. He's going to find things to get to the more serious, more mature pedagogy of showing how perception and the mind and the senses and other levels can engage with music and not get stuck in it, not get stuck in a certain style. Remember, we started off this whole series with John Adams, the famous American composer, with his problem with pop culture. He's got a LaRouche attitude. He thinks he represents some tradition, and he thinks it's being destroyed by the cheapness around him. Well, the cheapness is just another sensory level. It's lowbrow. There's highbrow sensory interaction and lowbrow. Both are sensory. So there has to be a third way to see through the sensory impact. And that's what Bach and these guys were doing, Mozart and Beethoven, and that's what Frank was doing. And that's why Frank would, on the surface, be appearing mentally to be dithyrambic, confusing, absurdist, anarchistic, because he never stuck in one position. Same accusations made of me, that because we jump around, I use the word quadrophenically, and explore different modalities and their frequencies, that is showing a detachment from the sensory hypnosis, the spell of the sensuous.
Yes,
so what would you add to that?
The artist becoming schizophrenic in the new environment. And you're saying we're more than schizophrenic, we're quadrophrenic. And
yes, because the Android meme, as technology comes alive, after the 60s, it mimes, it acts out this battle between the Aristotelian versus the Platonic tradition. You see that right in, the classifier, however this is spelled out in the culture, in think tanks at the Kennedy Center, or up in Harvard, or Bernstein in New York, the School of New York, coming out of, what's his name, Philip Glass and these people. There's a battle going on, and the Android meme is presenting in the global media landscape. It's imitating this debate, this ancient quarrel that LaRouche does really good at articulating, and that Frank engaged. Frank engaged the ancient quarrel. He didn't have to use the same statements and conceptual, factual, scientific paradigms that LaRouche uses, but they have the same perception of the inadequacy of the sensory makeup of people, and you can use music to program them in a new way. That's what Frank was doing, that tradition. Yes, and for example,
LaRouche, he in one of the videos he says he likes Schubert, a piece by Schubert, and he's always amazed to see or to listen to new interpretations of that same piece. He says there's always progress and innovation in the way different artists perform the same patterns. But I think Zappa goes beyond. One thing is it's only to read and interpret the music, but there is another more complex aspect of making music, which is the improvisation. And Zappa engaged that also a lot, because it's another type of awareness, another type of hearing, and another type of talking to each other. Talking is a way of improvising. And
yes,
it depends on what you feed your ideas, and also what we know now, the substances, how you make these patterns and how you can interact in the environment and with other human creations. And this is so important to be aware of that all the conversations are part of what LaRouche is saying is the big human creation that never stopped. So we have to engage in conversation.
Right, what Ein calls social mortar, the world of language and expression. In terms of the music...
the thing is, LaRouche thinks the immortal is human, the humanity as a whole, but not the individual. And the thing with the Iondom is that now we see is not only the whole human creation, which is eternal, but we also are as individuals.
Already eternal. And that could lead to an argument about, whether there's life after death and things like that. And Ion says there is. And Ion says the life after death is not important. It's staying in the physical. Like Tim Carey's character, Clarence Hilliard, we are gods and we can stay eternal in the body. That's where Ion differs with all the mystics who are trying to get to some other dimension, some other realm. That other realm can be a metaphor for not being addicted to the sensuous, the spell of the sensuous. But it doesn't matter on a certain level, at least up to Zappa, whether that argument gets resolved. Ion brings in a whole new completion, a new level of it, and many people who would appreciate what you're saying about LaRouche and Zappa may not go for that. But it doesn't matter, I think, whether you top that point, whether you're eternal or not. The thing is to get your perceptions of what's happening now and to recognize a more profound way culture can be used, and a more profound way the television environment can be used. Not in the content, but the fact that the society has TV, which creates a spiritual consciousness, as McLuhan said, the highest decibels of tactility coming through the TV environment back in the 50s, 60s. Well, what happens when the Android meme comes in and simulates everything, creates information overload, and makes the chemical body and its imagination feel at loose ends because they don't know what to create that would counter the Android meme. To see through the Android meme, to not be hypnotized by its dynamics, is the task of the modern composer. And I think that Frank was starting to deal with that with his creations in the 80s. He saw this virtual reality. He said the media was all there is, and he was going to figure out how to do an anti-environment to that. And that prefigured what we're doing here with Iondom. I was thinking, Roxy, let's see if we got some people here, if they have any statements, questions about what you're saying. First of all, is that you, Bert? Is that you, Bert, coming in anonymous? I just opened. Who's anonymous? They're speaking, but we don't hear you. Check your mute. Okay, we can't hear you. All right, so here's Yuri. Yuri, do you have something you want to say to what Roxy's saying, what we're proposing here? Yuri. Okay, nothing from Yuri. Okay, Madeline. Madeline, do you have anything to say in response to these very profound ideas that Roxy is applying to Iondom? Okay. Michael.
I'm alive, Bob. I'm alive.
Okay, so Yuri, you have something to say. Go. Why weren't you there, Yuri? What were you doing?
Oh, I got distracted by John Lithgow's kid-size concert soundtrack.
Oh, you weren't listening to us.
I was, but then it kind of popped in my mind really quickly. And
okay, so what do you have to say? What do you have to say about what you've heard that you did hear?
Okay, so some really interesting things about Bach. I didn't know that Bach didn't start out with sound, right? Because I wrote some notes. Yeah, you can answer that, Roxy.
Well, because his music was all a way of praising God. So it was just like a tool.
So okay, so him working with sound became an extension of his spiritual beliefs, his practices and stuff.
Well, not only spiritual, he was expanding his bodies. Actually, he thought it was a way of engaging something higher, like he was talking to something higher than just men, and that's the thing that we always knew, even in the fallen state, that to understand the power, we have to understand frequencies. But people thought it was the power of God. It's not your own power.
Do you think that he ever believed that man is one with God?
Yes, but their understanding was different from ours. There was a sense of communion, but I don't think he would consider himself a god.
Okay.
But they could see that humans have incredible possibilities of creation, and just the fact that you can take an idea and make all types of variations. They were fascinated with that. Bach is the master of the fugue, and he shows, okay, you give me this idea and I'll make this. He made counterpoint up to 36 voices, I think.
36.
So all these parallel melodies going at the same time, talking to each other. So there is a mathematical complexity that fascinates everybody that listens to him. But he was just trying to translate the divine he saw, the way that God could talk to us through mathematicals or the intelligence, or it was a way to interact with that intelligence, to use these discoveries.
So in a way, working with the intelligence of man and nature to speak with God, or like getting them to work together to speak to God in a way.
Yes, to interact with that intelligence, because I mean, God is not going to answer you like I am, but they thought he was expressing with this beautiful logic and all these laws that were being discovered. They saw there is an intelligence there that is higher. So that was the proof for them that there was a God outside.
That's interesting. That he was.
And it's interesting that they see it outside and they try to translate this visual space into something acoustic. They try to make the music of the spheres, how to use this intelligence that is in nature.
Okay.
So
he sees
to talk to God.
He sees the ability for us to talk to God, right? So in a way, kind of like creating that intelligence or that platform where we can listen to this, or more like interact with this platform by listening to it, and in a way it would be like speaking with God or exchanging with God in a way, right?
Yes, just by using the keyboard.
Yeah.
He was translating the planets in the keyboard. So just by playing the keyboard, you were already somehow engaging that higher intelligence.
So what do you think about what the listener feels from his music?
Yes, that's amazing that many people say, I mean, I cannot judge from a really outsider point of view because I grew up listening to Baroque music. I played violin. And I don't know, I think it really speaks to everybody, the frequencies. It's like they say, music is universal. I don't know what would be like to somebody who really, really never heard this type of music. If they would like it or feel something when they listen to that, like a really isolated person from another culture, which is hard to find now. But
so would it be almost like a language that helps you communicate, or like a language that helps you connect with the world? Do you feel that?
Well, the fascination with music is that it's abstract type of communication. It's not words. It's like many say the things that cannot be said with words are expressed by music. Mm-hmm. Because you can express all types of emotion and ideas with sounds without words. And that's another thing that LaRouche finds very interesting, how men create other types of languages, not only with words. And actually, Ion also talks about this communication with the eye cell, the frequencies.
So,
that we listen, not only with the ears, the acoustic environment, but we listen in a cymatic way. The cymatic is how sound affects matter. And sound moves through all materials, not only through air. Mm-hmm. And these particles moving, vibrating, affect how things are built or made. So at the cellular level, there is communication of the frequency.
Right, just want to say cymatics. You said the word cymatics. That's C-Y-M-A-T-I-C. S maybe. Cymatics. Look that up on YouTube. You see some experiments where sound alters the matter.
And that's another point of LaRouche.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
There was another type of tuning called the Verdi tuning, in which A is 332 hertz, and the Germans changed that to 440. And
was that done during the Nazis, Roxy? Was that done in the Nazi regime? Yeah, the Nazis did that.
Yes.
They changed it.
Yes, yeah. And if you see some experiments with the 332 hertz, they put these frequencies in sand or water. You see some forms, some patterns forming with the waves. And they're more beautiful with the Verdi tuning than with the German tuning. The Germans doesn't make these very beautiful patterns. They're less clear. And some engineers and some scientists say that really doesn't matter, but you can see really the visuals show that. Yeah, we should ask Ion about that.
Yes. And you're saying that in your experience, you prefer one over the other.
Well, things sound sort of the same, actually. I mean, if I go to the Philharmonie here in Berlin, they tune with the Karajan tuning, that is this tuning, and it's amazing. So, but we should ask Ion if it's true that the difference of the interval in the frequency really affects in
the listeners'
in a negative way.
Receptivity?
But LaRouche, that's the thing with LaRouche. He goes a lot into the conspiracy.
Yeah.
And he sees that changing the tuning also as a way of down and affecting the people. He sees
and keeping the elite in power.
Yes, and for him the popular music is not worth, because he says this music is serving just the elite, the fact that they are just making money, there is no other reason for the music, and they are also selling drugs, so they need music for each substance, and maybe you can talk about how these substances create the music, or how. But he always goes into these conspiracy things.
Now, Frank did a little bit, but Frank didn't let it stop him. He didn't focus on it, and he was a little more tolerant of the capitalist situation than LaRouche was. Well, let's not say the capitalist, the usurious banking, post-industrial, digital derivatives world that LaRouche hated at what happened, since the 80s. And Zappa, Zappa had access to the people more than LaRouche did. LaRouche had to, create this semi-cult of kids running for local political office. And although LaRouche had connections and influence and associates all over the world, you could say on the information level he had a bigger network than Zappa, but nobody ever heard of LaRouche. Nobody was reading his stuff, and whenever it ended up in the mainstream media, they would smear LaRouche, they'd arrest him, they'd make his image look really bad, they'd ridicule it, and though Frank got ridiculed, he had access to millions of people through his pop culture empire. So it's interesting that Zappa, by not being, because Zappa was using a modern technology, the guitar, and amplified music, and LaRouche stuck with less amplified music and was on a political agenda trying to become president. And isn't it interesting that Zappa was concluding becoming president, but it didn't matter if he didn't or not. He still was more influential than maybe a president could be. So what's great about Zappa is he took advantage of his skills and talents that were that would be popular, that would the audience, the cheapness world would like his skills. They don't like LaRouche's skills. He's a literate guy, talks concepts they can't understand, writes long articles, gives long, boring speeches. That doesn't work, if you want to get to the people. And Frank was always trying to see and find the intelligent people latent in the dumb masses. There were hundreds of them, millions of them, you could say, that would respond to Frank if he felt that he had been given bigger coverage, and that's why he objected to them not suppressing him. He objected to them suppressing and not playing his music on mainstream radio. But fortunately, the FM channels and the cable TV and all this decentralized electronic stuff that McLuhan saw had a lot of services. Frank was able to make contact with thousands of people through the decentralized media. So he had the advantage over LaRouche in getting attention.
But there is also mirroring of how the music changed and what substances are available. I think that's also very interesting.
Yes, you don't see LaRouche talking about cuisine so much. As a matter of fact, he did admit back in the 80s that they were a bit weak on analyzing developments in chemistry. He actually said that. They were good on physics and new machine tools and new energies like hot fusion and that, but weak on chemistry. Well, Zappa was strong on chemistry as a metaphor, at least, because he wrote a column called Non-Foods. And he always said that he was a household ammonia. That's what he called his band in 1967, 68. They were cleaning a cleaning fluid, household ammonia. So, and remember Frank as a kid experiment with the chemical laboratory box. What were those things called that kids would get? Oh, yeah, chemistry set, says Carolyn. He played with a chemistry set and, blew things up and almost killed himself a couple times. You can see the details of that in his brother's new book, Growing Up Zappa, Frankie and Bobby, Frank and Bobby growing up Zappa, and he goes into the crazy scientific experiments Frank was doing from a very young age. So, anyway, Zappa had the more relevant modern talents, especially in the new electrified acoustic space, to become a bigger figure than LaRouche. But what we're pointing out is that if you understand what Zappa was doing, you listen to what LaRouche says. LaRouche spells it out philosophically, technically, grammatically, and makes you appreciate the tradition that Frank was replaying. That's what's interesting.
Yes, and then Bob comes and takes all of them, all the tradition, all of LaRouche, all of Zappa, eat it, and I
make a wonderful new composition. I make an amazing composition. What'd you say?
Yes.
The last word?
You built on that because you don't limit yourself to the LaRouche ideas, to the Thompson ideas, or to Zappa.
Even to Zappa.
You built on all that.
I liked what you said on the chat line that I'm playing various musics in the first couple hours of the show, putting together what many specialists of taste would not include. And you're saying that's a metaphor for the method of going through the quadrants that I talk about. And Zappa, McLuhan, LaRouche, they're all conscious quadraphenics. They're all pretty encyclopedic. But I'm standing on all their shoulders and conducting from a more comprehensive level than each one of them was. I didn't get bogged down in making art forms. I mean, LaRouche had to run a political party. Zappa had to run a musical production studio. I didn't make anything, but I stayed tuned into the present, and then that evoked Ion. And then Ion comes in more comprehensive than anybody's ever heard in human history in his way of bouncing around and maintaining a continuity, but fluctuating comedically, aggressively, passively. Ion completes what I was miming metaphysically, you could say, whatever you call exploring different schools of perception and thought. Is that a kind of metaphysical promiscuity? Maybe, but it includes physics. And then also Carolyn's medicine. I don't think LaRouche, Zappa, McLuhan, Thompson, Croker, anybody else, James Joyce, had a partner who was a genius working with chemistry and substance. That helps the scenario. You know what I mean? And what Carolyn did was really important to this project. I mean, after we interviewed Frank Zappa in 1988, Frank didn't hug me. He hugged Carolyn, who hadn't said a word. Carol was sitting there observing. Carol was radiating, according to Carol. You did speak a little bit after, but you basically listened to his scenario with being surveilled by the FBI and all the different things that we didn't record.
But then I sang Black Napkins.
Oh yeah, we drew attention to Carol by asking Jerry Fialka asked Carol to whistle. What do you call mime? Vocalize the beginning of that great guitar piece called Black Napkins. So Frank stood at her, waiting for her to do it, but she couldn't do it looking at him. So Carol had to turn her back and did it from the back. We heard her projecting from her mouth through her and around herself, back to us. And as she was doing it, Frank jumped over, picked her up, and whirled her around. So I guess she did it okay. She passed the audition. But it's important to recognize the complementarity of Iondom, which is Carolyn, me, and then this incredible, weird, creative person, J.W. That's what put it together. That's what created the lotus flower of Iondom. But what's striking, Roxana, is how you can go back and see LaRouche, Zappa, McLuhan, and Joyce, and Comenius and Leibniz are anticipating the completion via Eindom and looking for these substances.
Yes, the amazing concept called Trinity. It's what always makes me cry. That I see how things are really from the Tree of Life up to now. There was this genealogy you are studying.
Well, wouldn't it
be in the Genesis that you are doing all this metanoia because you're going back to the Tree of Life?
Right. Which I think and another aspect of that is that Frank describes this point that and Frank defines that we're not going anywhere because the waves cancel out the time. If wave equals time, we quoted that last week, and the canceling out of it means that it's already happened. And not many people said that. Usually people say all times are happening now, but Frank's saying it's already happened. And that's an important little twist there that puts Frank closer to the Ionic. But the point is that this tradition, this conception of continuity, is actually a dimension, a part of yourself that's right beside you. So we're not like continuing passing it on. It is more having access to the transcended state that's already there. Like Beethoven would tap into it, Bach would tap into it, LaRouche would do it, Zappa did it. It's the completion was always lurking. So anybody who had whatever luck, whatever it is, spiritual grace, could access the transcended continent right there, beside them.
Yes, and in a way, it's like there was in the Renaissance person, Robert Fludd. He made this monochord in which you see how he's trying to put all the environment into an instrument, like all the elements, all the planets, the notes, the angels, and then the tuning hand is the hand of God. And then Frank Zappa speaks of the big piano. We are inside a big resonating box that is the environment. And all the totality of all these sounds make the big note, but there is something else besides the big note. And so there is always this trying to visualize the thing that contains us, that is the hologram, as an instrument that is resonating, because it's all frequency. And
okay, now I want to.
The last explanation is the Ionic, in which we finally know how is this made with the frequencies and the chemistries. And that's what I think I am saying, that you're going back to the Tree of Life. It's not really going back, but understanding the frequency and the chemistry.
You're remembering it. And the piano is being closed. The music is being canceled. That's what Ion's doing also. It's over. And you get happy or get out, or find out what the completion meant. So there is that stark statement by Ion: the guff is emptying, creativity has reached its zenith, the labyrinth of mind is no longer a big deal, and that's a pretty dramatic statement by Ion. Now, I want to go through some of the notes that Roxy sent me during the week as she explored this stuff. Now, she just mentioned Robert Fludd. You may not have heard her pronunciation, Flood, F-L-U-D-D. So Roxy says, and sometimes in her translation I can't get exactly what she's saying, but she says, you recommend a YouTube, it's in Italian. And then you say, but you can hear the music, Bob, and see the monochord by Robert Fludd. The inspiration for Bach to create a scale of 12 tones. The well-tempered keyboard. The keyboard is actually a translation of the cosmos. And we have the note S-O-L or G. What is G, S-O-L? Do, re, mi, fa, sol. Is that what you're saying?
The note G in Latin is called sol. sun.
Oh, that means sun, right. The G that Ion pointed out the importance of G in a lot of
the sun
music.
Ra.
Sun Ra, good point. Yeah, Sun Ra, which means sun. Sol means sun in Latin because of the planets. We have the note G because of the planets. And the other notes are surrounding the sun. Because the planets, which are the other notes, are surrounding the sun, we're inside a big piano. We're trying to understand the power of God, the big note, the frequency. From Galileo's museum, you see Vincenzo Galileo, Galileo's father, studied acoustics to understand the cosmos, as did Kepler. So that's Roxy's first comment. Then she sent another YouTube. In this video...
Bach was trying to make... he developed the keyboard. Robert Flute had only one string, one chord, a monochord. But the piano is a bigger range of frequencies, is almost all what we can hear. Or we can hear more, but that's what maybe because the perception also changes, that's the range they thought was good for music, from the bass to the very high. But you have many strings. All these strings are translating the heaven, the reflection of the perfection. Robert Flute was making only one string, and Bach is making many strings in the keyboard.
Well, the printing press is extending human sensibility. Many dimensions, right. We have to understand the printing press extends the sensibilities, complicates it, creates a new complexity which require more complex music and more strings. So people are mutated by the printing press. It's a visual bias, but still it's a new level of perception that humans didn't have as a result of experiencing the print world. So then Roxy sends me a second YouTube and says, in this video, they have the audio examples of the sound made by the elliptical movements of each planet. Then she sends me a third video and says, examples of Bach's well-tempered piano praising God by using the cosmos as the archetype to tune in for tuning. Using mathematics and the ideas of Kepler to compose was a way of communicating with the divine and adoring the composer God. Understanding music was a way of understanding how the power works, capital P power. We're still into understanding the frequency, says Roxy. Then she sends another video and says, connections to the eternal with frequency. Bach cosmicity. The music translates the environments as language, but in an abstract way, and also affects the different acoustical landscapes. It was always very important to program the environments, says Roxy, about what they were doing. They were programming the environment. It had a crucial role in religion and society. It was a very important, these acoustic landscapes, a very important tool to develop one's brain, to be able to face the new complex challenges. Both LaRouche and Zappa consider music as a crucial part of their agenda and a way to re-educate the sensus communis, the public opinion, the common sense, to reconnect with the eternal conceptual continuity. Okay, then the next YouTube she sends, she says, Zappa, like LaRouche, is educating the beer-drinking folks. His whole work is not only his music, but his speech is as important. What Zappa says is what you're saying? What Zappa says is important?
I think he will be quoted like we quote the Founding Fathers. Yes. Many of the things he said will be quoted like that, like Zappa said.
In the future, yeah. So, and Sprechstimme, that musical concept, he would bring in the rhythms of speech into his tonal composition. I think that's partly what you mean, right? Speech, the folk rhythms of pop culture, the speech rhythms. Here he educates harmonica, and Roxy's punning on quoting Phineas Wake, which has the character Tristan going to America, but it's pronounced harmonica, referring to Brittany and the area between Ireland and northern France. And so Frank is educating harmonica about democracy. LaRouche, on the contrary, thinks democracy is a mistake because having the more votes doesn't mean you're right, like the elections of the Bush clan illustrated, that there's only more stupidity than hydrogen in the universe. So LaRouche called it republicanism, what he was for. And, he complained about the Electoral College controlling the democratic process. Frank complained about the Electoral College also. They both pointed out
he had this very complex concept of xenocracy.
Yes, and xenocracy, strange democracy. Okay, so then you have this, then you send me a concluding statement on Friday the 13th. In the longer, let's see, I know what you were saying. Basically, you're saying, in LaRouche, I see the link to Zappa. For politics, our participation in the eternal process. For Zappa, all is part of the conceptual continuity. Zappa believes in democracy. LaRouche says in the video, democracy is insane, the system and the voters are insane, the environments are sick, but music is part of the solution, according to LaRouche. And then you slip into Spanish, which I can't translate, something about we have to develop our brains and patterns to understand and face the challenges. You say he goes at the end to the cosmicity. You mean both Zappa and LaRouche do? Go to the cosmicity?
No, at the end of the video, he's saying there are many bigger challenges that the only way
going out to space.
And for example, he said there was always this threat of asteroids hitting the Earth, but we were not aware. Now we are aware of these asteroids flying by, and he says. We send things to outer space, to Mars, to Venus, to the space, so we are not limited to the Earth. And even he thinks that even when the sun will stop shining, there will be humans and we will be somewhere else. That doesn't matter.
Right.
Because
that's LaRouche. You're talking about LaRouche there. Then you say you and I have enough ideas to talk about the pedagogic and political Zappa and LaRouche as alternatives in Amnerica. Now there you quote Frank's work. That's Amnerica, Amnesiac America. Might be one of the reasons Zappa calls it Amnerica, which sees only the limitations of the fallen state. And then we develop what Frank and LaRouche are doing into what Iandom is doing. And then we develop a new song, The Real Healing Frequency. And then you say, good night, and you pretend to go to sleep. Now, this thing about we're hijacking the Zappa ideology or the Zappa program and saying it's anticipation that John the Baptist for Iandom. That's a pretty outrageous statement, but Roxy has the skills and the background to understand the world of music, has been in rock bands herself, was well known in Mexico in the 90s, 20 years ago, as the first woman, playing the synthesizer, or just the first woman in the rock world, in the nightclub world? What were you?
No, we had the first techno band. But we also had a center of musical research with Antonio Rusek and Mario Lavista and Arturo Marquez.
You talking about the Gurdjieff? You talking about the Gurdjieff Center?
Composer. Yeah, but they're all important composers in Mexico. But then.
Right. So the fact that Zappa did pop music and then went into classical traditions and worked in both media, that is more common among Generation X kids and the millennials maybe. I've met many young people who can do pop music but also can do classical. Like Zappa was a prototype for what the kids, as they had the opportunities in the 80s and 90s with the advanced technologies to learn all kinds of things and not be embedded in one style or the other, one medium or the other. So they were becoming quadrophenic. And you're an example of that. You did classical music all through your youth, but then you got into electronic music and pop culture music. So you're a clone of the Zappa comprehensiveness. So I'm saying that Roxy is quite capable to judge what the claims we're making here at INDM and to critique what we're saying and to be smart enough, because she took the RNA drops, and to see how Zappa and LaRouche and Finney's Wake and McLuhan anticipate INDM. So congratulations, and you did a great job explaining these connections, Roxy. Now let's see if someone else wants to ask something. I don't know, this Newark. Who's Newark 973? Is that, who's that? Is that, it's not Yuri. Is that Jamie, or who is that? I don't think it's Sarah. 973-943. You don't want to speak? Which is silly if you don't speak. I don't know what you're doing here if you're not interested in speaking.
Well, but again, in the meantime, I can just say we can go now to the civilization phase number 3, because it's what they're saying there is now clear when after this introduction of how he's already seeing the ionic.
Good point. Okay, so just at the 973 started to have the little red reflection. Are you trying to say something, 973? No, you coward. You ain't doing nothing if you're just listening. Now, Eliza's here. Do you have anything to say, Eliza?
Hi, Bob.
Hello. You got some. Oh, but I did play your band. I did play Ellie King. You may not have heard it. You may not have been here, but that's been played, okay?
Yeah.
Back at the beginning.
I just came home like half an hour ago, so I'm going to have to re-listen to it. You played that song, finally?
Yeah, it's a good song. Good song. I hadn't even listened to it. I just played it because you demanded it, and it was okay.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have anything to say? You like Zappa. You're interested in Zappa. Is there something that we're saying that you want to ask about or opine about?
Well, let me see. There was a quote that I was on Ian and Bob's site today, and I was reading this article on Marshall McLuhan and the Cliche from Archetype article, but someone else was talking about it.
That's Terence Gordon. Eliza, Terence Gordon. He lives in Nova. Listen, he lives in Nova Scotia. He's a professor in Nova Scotia, and he wrote the second biography of McLuhan, and he wrote a very good article explaining the book From Cliche to Archetype, which I read earlier today and sent it over to Ed. Sounds like Ed put it up right away. Is that what you're talking about? Explaining the differences between cliche and archetype and how they interpenetrate? Is that the article you talked about?
Yeah. That was probably the article. It was a really good article because sometimes when there's a third party translating or talking about one of McLuhan's works or writings, it's kind of easier to grasp.
That's right.
Yeah.
You're listening to me translate McLuhan, and the third translation can be more beneficial for the moment. Then you'll go back and listen to how I use it. But Terence Gordon, we asked him to participate in the McLuhan on Maui year-long symposium, but he wouldn't do it for some reason. So I don't know if he knew anything about me, but we actually made contact with him because Sue Bone Sky Goddess Sue was in Wolfville, Nova Scotia, where there's Acadia University, and went into a used bookstore and was looking around, and there was this guy, and she gets talking to him, and it turns out to be Terence Gordon. And so he was interested in her. He was interested in her and gave her his phone number. And so she gave it to me, and we called him, and I talked to him. And he said, well, I think that you can take my writings and use them or something. He wasn't, for some reason, keen on engaging with me and Andrew Crystal and other people, live on the phone. So, but anyways, his book is not bad. The one he did on McLuhan, though he wrote not too good stuff about Don Thiel, and Don Thiel was going to sue Terence Gordon. So look at this. The guy you're reading is who Don Thiel was going to sue for what Terence Gordon said about Don Thiel. I would say that Terence Gordon was too much under the influence of Eric and the McLuhan family, and that's why he didn't get the whole story. But Don decided not to sue Terence, but to write a second book of McLuhan. He'd already done one back in 1971. And the inspiration for writing that book was me. So I saved Terence Gordon's ass by inspiring Don to have a new dialogue about McLuhan, which then Don said, there are some people who would be interested in what I have to say. So he wrote the second book, The Virtue of Marshall McLuhan, and didn't sue Terence. So isn't that neat how it all gets tied in there with 2 degrees of separation to Dobbstown? Right. And Terence is writing that article in the Journal of Visual Culture, and that's where Derek de Kerkhoff wrote an article a year ago and blew it with a misquote of McLuhan, and that led me to admonishing Derek, and then Derek and I ended up starting to do a dialogue, which I have to say we just did 2 on Thursday, one on Thursday and one earlier today, with Derek being in Nice, France, reacting to the assassinations and terrorism in Paris. So you're going to find it a very interesting dialogue because Derek is quite emotional about what's going on right there in Paris and how it's affecting him, and I'm trying to put it through a McLuhan filter. So that dialogue happened this morning. We haven't done a dialogue in 3 or 4 months, so it was timely that was.
Do we get to hear it here?
I actually could play it later tonight. I could play it.
Yeah, I want to hear it.
Yeah, that would be great, Bob.
Did you get to get Ian's feedback on the Paris attack?
No. I don't comment on what we're doing with Ion.
Leaving? Because this is a digression.
No. We're doing a lot of Zappa. We're going to do Civilization Phase 3. But anyway, so Eliza, are you relating the cliched archetype, Terence Gordon, to the Zappa point here?
I was, because I heard something, and that reminded me of the article that I read. And what's Commodius Vicus? Because I was kind of skimming through it fast, so I thought that was the author's name.
Yeah.
But what is Commodius Vicus?
That is the first line of Finnegan's Wake. Commodius Vicus of recirculation. Just Google and look at the first page. It's actually page 3 of Finnegan's Wake, and you'll see that phrase, which is a reference to Vico and Vico's theory of history, besides the fact there is a road that goes around Dublin called the Vico Road. And so you're in a car driving around Dublin at the beginning of Finnegan's Wake, as well as referring to the rhetorical tradition that Vico was a professor of. Okay, so unless someone has something else to say, we're going to go to Civilization Phase 3, and you sent me that, Roxy. So I will look. There it is. And let's see. The one, I assume this has all the links. Right. Okay, so Roxy, I'm going to play in the order that they're presented here. You agree with that? The way they're listed here. Roxy. What happened? You get knocked out? Well, I hope she comes back. Maybe her phone got disconnected. So we're going to play Civilization Phase 3, and I'll do it through my own system here. So it might not be perfect sound, but it's good enough. We play ionic requests through this. So this is Zappa's last so-called masterpiece. He finished before he died. I think he finished just before he died in '93, and has a lot of talk on it. And it's pretty interesting because that's where Frank takes the ramblings of the people in the inside a piano, and they're improvising, but Frank's also telling them, in a way, guiding what they have to say. I'd have to go back and read the details of how much Zappa controlled it. But he first recorded in '67 in New York, and he took some of those improvised dialogues of the characters actually inside a piano, and made the album Lumpy Gravy. And then, 25 years later, he finishes Lumpy Gravy and calls it Civilization Phase 3 with new dialogues inside a piano, including his daughter Moon Unit. So here we go with the Civilization Phase 3. Just a minute. I'm going to do it this way. Okay. This is phase 3. And phase is spelled P-H-A-Z-E. Okay, we're going to take a break here and discuss what we've heard. I will mute everybody.
All participants are now muted.
Yes.
Okay, is that your hand, Roxy? Is that your hand?
I suppose.
Yes. Now, do you want...
Here, Zappa takes again the archetype of the piano, the clavier that was developed by Bach, and makes it the environment. We are all inside this acoustic landscape of frequencies, and all this, he says, the environment is the big note.
Right. And did you hear what the guy said? You mean we're going around it? We're going around it? No, that would be the solar orbiting. And
yes,
he goes, no, it just is.
The music of the spheres. That's the thing with the tradition of the music is we thought the sun is like the